The fire is already lit. Sit down, breathe, and listen. You're not falling apart. You're being rearranged, freely inspired by Jung. That night, he couldn't understand why everything seemed to collapse. Old relationships were dissolving. Plans no longer made sense. There was a strange feeling in his chest, not sadness, but displacement. It was as if something inside was coming undone, without him knowing what was being born in its place. It wasn't depression. It wasn't a crisis. It was something else, a symbolic silence that announced an ending, but not the end of life, the end of a version of himself. Jung was there too, not in words, but in the atmosphere. In that silent presence of someone who had seen many souls mistake collapse for failure, when in truth, it was the beginning of transformation. This video isn't about easy answers. It's about recognizing the signs. 7 clear, yet subtle, signs that your life is not falling apart. It's opening, slowly, towards something more true. That night, he couldn't understand why everything seemed to collapse. Old relationships were dissolving. Plans no longer made sense. There was a strange feeling in his chest, not sadness, but displacement. It was as if something inside was coming undone, without him knowing what was being born in its place. It wasn't depression. It wasn't a crisis. It was something else, a symbolic silence that announced an ending, but not the end of life, the end of a version of himself. Jung was there too. Not in words, but in the atmosphere. In that silent presence of someone who had seen many souls mistake collapse for failure. When in truth, it was the beginning of transformation. This video isn't about easy answers. It's about recognizing the signs. 7 clear, yet subtle signs that your life is not falling apart. It's opening, slowly, towards something more true. You'll understand why the sensation of loss is in fact an inner realignment. How the disconnection from your old self is the first step toward individuation. And why the chaos you feel isn't a mistake, it's a calling. But first, a warning. This transition doesn't come with certainty. It comes with layers, with silence, with the discomfort of letting go of everything that is no longer yours. Are you ready to recognize the signs of a soul awakening? Then stay. The fire still has much to reveal. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but something inside him had shifted. Without fanfare, without warning, it just changed. Things that once made sense now felt hollow. Conversations that used to bring joy now felt draining. He looked around, and everything seemed the same. But inside, the landscape had changed. It was as if his certainties had aged overnight. As if what once held him up could no longer support him. And this feeling, this strangeness, was not a mistake. It was the sign. Jung wrote that the unconscious doesn't send direct answers. It sends signs, patterns, dreams, discomforts. And if you don't listen, it turns up the volume. Doubt was the first whisper. Not the doubt of an anxious mind, but the sacred doubt that rises from the soul. The kind that doesn't ask for logic. It asks for silence. It asks to be heard. It asks for courage. He began questioning everything. Inherited beliefs, old desires, even the dreams that once felt like his, now sounded like scripts he'd merely followed, without ever truly choosing them. And that doubt hurt, because it disrupted what once felt safe, but at the same time, it freed him, because for the first time, he stopped following and started observing. Jung once said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." And now he was finally accepting that something was dying within. But not him, just what no longer made sense. That doubt was not weakness. It was the first step toward the real. Because no one transforms without first admitting they no longer know who they are. He began to notice small distances, not physical, but internal. Places that once felt comforting now made him restless. People he loved no longer recognized him. And the strangest part, he no longer recognized himself either. The same habits, the same routine, the same words he used to define himself now felt like tight clothes. He no longer fit in the life he had built, but he didn't yet know who he was outside of it. It was as if part of him was saying goodbye, not with sorrow, but with maturity. The feeling was clear, even if hard to explain. This no longer belongs to me. Jung called this moment the symbolic death of the persona. When social roles begin to dissolve and the real self tries to emerge. The ego resists. The mind clings to what is falling apart, but the soul has already decided. The disconnection has arrived. Not out of negligence, but out of evolution. After the disconnection came the silence. Not a peaceful silence, but the kind that frightens. The kind that arrives when everything feels stuck, suspended in the air. Nothing brought pleasure. Nothing made sense, and for the first time, he stopped trying to fix himself. He simply gave up. Not on life, but on forcing meaning into something that no longer held any. Jung said There is a phase when the soul enters suspension. It's when the old has died, but the new has not yet been born. It's the sacred interval between two versions of the self. And in that space that many turn back, because there's no proof that anything is working. There is no map. There is no miracle. Only silence. Only emptiness. Only you with you. But it is exactly in this space that the soul begins to rearrange itself.
It was in the middle of that silence that he began to notice small things. A sentence in a book. A strange dream. A feeling in his chest when entering a room. Nothing grand, but everything precise. It was no longer the mind that guided him. It was something else. Something older, calmer, deeper. Jung called it the voice of the self, the essential core that knows where to go, even when the conscious mind is still confused. He couldn't explain why he started saying no to certain things, or why he felt like distancing himself from people who had always been around. But he felt it. And for the first time, he chose to trust. Not out of impulse, but out of resonance. Intuition didn't shout. It whispered. And now, he was listening. It was there, in the middle of the silence and the listening, that he finally understood. It wasn't a lack of effort, nor a lack of faith, and certainly not a lack of worthiness. What had kept him stuck was the constant effort to appear whole, to keep up an image, to hold it all together, to not disappoint, to keep being the person everyone expected him to be, even though deep down he no longer was. Jung said, transformation doesn't happen when we deny our fragile parts, but when we integrate them. And he had never allowed himself to fall apart, never let the armor crack, never admitted, I'm tired of pretending I'm okay. And it was that silent effort, that unshakable strength he tried to uphold, that became the blockage. Life doesn't respond to the version you try to maintain. It responds to the version you truly are, even in ruins. After the insight, he thought everything would feel lighter. But what came was something else. Forgotten memories, old shames, accumulated anger, sadness he swore he had already resolved. It was as if by letting go of the image of strength, everything hidden began to surface. Without warning, without filters, without censorship. Then, Jung returned not as a concept, but as a presence. As if to say, without saying, what you refuse to look at continues to rule everything. He realized that behind the goals, the desires, even behind spirituality, there was still fear. Fear of failure, fear of being forgotten, fear of not being loved. As long as these parts remained excluded, nothing would change. Because you don't attract what you say you want. You attract what you still haven't had the courage to embrace, even in silence. He claimed to be seeking healing, growth, awareness. And on the outside, everything seemed aligned. But inside, something was restless. It wasn't peace. It was urgency. A silent rush to understand, to get rid of the pain, to reach some idealized version of himself. Then came the question, like a dismantling wave. Do I truly want to grow? Or do I just want to stop feeling like this? Jung said no real transformation is born from the denial of pain. And he had been trying to evolve without touching what still hurt, chasing the light without allowing himself to stay in the dark long enough. Even the desire to heal can be an escape when it comes from anxiety, not from presence. The soul doesn't awaken through speed. It awakens through wholeness. He stopped. Stopped forcing, stopped rushing, stopped even asking for signs. And in that empty space, something new appeared. A simple yet definite idea. What if I've never been trying to attract something new? What if all of this is just a way to remember who I already am? That version of himself, the one who knows his own worth, the one who walks in peace, the one who lives without proving anything to anyone, she's not in the future. She is buried beneath the demands, the expectations, the fear of not being accepted exactly as he is. Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." Maybe he never needed to manifest anything. He just needed to remember, to silence the noise and return.
He no longer needed to achieve anything, nor vibrate higher, nor understand everything, nor be more. What he needed was to return to the point he had forgotten, that quiet place where presence lives, not performance. The more he let go of the demands, the more space began to appear. And in that space, he started to realize that the version of him that knows how to live in peace was already there, just buried by effort, by comparison, by the fear of not being enough without proving himself. He thought he was trying to manifest a future, but in truth, he was only dismantling what wasn't his, the inherited beliefs, the urgencies of others, the versions the world asked for, but that were never really him. And in place of all that, something new appeared. Not ecstasy, not a victory, but a calm. The calm of someone who remembers, I already am. That night he no longer needed urgency, no rush to understand, no need to explain himself. He simply stayed in front of the fire, in silence, whole, present. And it was in that simple space, without effort, without answers, that Jung returned, not as a quote, not as an idea, but as a presence, the same presence that walks with those who have fallen and didn't need to get back up in a hurry. As if to say, with the gaze of someone who knows, now yes, now it has begun. Jung never promised miracles. He spoke of cycles, of creative chaos, of underground processes no one sees, but that change everything. The tree you see today, he wrote, was once a seed that endured the darkness. And that night, he understood. It was never about winning. It was about enduring with lucidity until the real could emerge. What he experienced that night was not a collapse. It was a right. Silent. Invisible. Deep. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you are, of integrating what was split, of gathering all the parts the ego tried to hide. Culture asks for goals, high performance, affirmations, achievements, elevated vibrations. But Jung didn't speak of rising. He spoke of descending to the place where the truth lives. It's not about becoming someone else, nor about healing everything before you can exist. It's about stopping the performance, about becoming whole again, even if imperfect. Know all the theories, master all the techniques, but when you touch a human soul, be just another human soul, Jung wrote. Maybe the world needs less formulas and more presence, less haste and more pause, less artificial light and more real fire, the kind that burns slowly but never goes out. That night, I didn't receive answers. And maybe that's why everything finally made sense. There was no more urgency, no pressure, not even that subtle impulse to prove myself, not even to me. For the first time, I wasn't trying to change my life. I was simply present in it. Without explanation, without performance, without filters. And it was there, in that silent place, that I realized nothing outside of me needs to happen for something inside of me to begin. Since then, every time doubt returns, or the world demands versions of me that no longer fit, I don't run. I don't resist. I return to the fire. If something inside you felt calm during this vigil, it wasn't because I said something. It was because you listened to yourself. Maybe this video didn't give you answers, but it pointed to a path, the one that leads back to yourself. Silent, real, non-transferable. Jung wrote, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." If that awakening began today, honor it. With presence, with pause, with silence. That night, I understood everything. And since then, whenever the world feels heavy, I return to the fire. See you soon.